Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're jumping into a real investigative puzzle. It all kicks off with a question that seems, pretty simple on the surface. But as you're about to see, the simplest questions, they often lead you down the most complicated roads.
So here it is. How many cases of tribal land alienation are there in Meghalaya? I mean, it seems like a fair question, right? You think there's a report somewhere, a government office that just has this number. But, well, the reality is a whole lot messier.
Because the answer isn't a number you can just look up. It's a maze, a real labyrinth of different courts, different laws, and totally disconnected records. And honestly, that maze itself, that tells us a huge part of the story.
Okay, so let's get right into it. To really get why you can't just get a simple count, you first have to realize that a case isn't just one single thing. It's way more deceptive than that.
Think about it like this. One single land issue, say an illegal transfer, can fracture into 5 or even more totally separate streams. It could show up as a criminal complaint, maybe for forging a document, or it could be a civil suit trying to get the land back. It might even escalate all the way to the high court. Then you've got the district council courts for certain cases. And on top of all that, there are also administrative hearings. Each one of these is its own separate world.
And right there, that's the core of the problem. These streams don't all flow into one big data lake. They're almost completely siloed off from each other. There's no master file, no central database pulling it all together. So getting a simple statewide count, it's literally impossible.
So if you're an investigator and you hit this wall, what do? I mean, how do you even begin to understand the scale of a problem when there's no single source of truth? Well, you have to put on your detective hat and start piecing together clues from all those different places.
There's actually a term for this. It's called triangulation. You can think of it as our investigative toolkit for this mystery. Instead of just relying on one piece of information, you pull data from a bunch of different independent sources. The goal is to see if they all point in the same direction, to build a much more complete and reliable picture of what's really going on.
All right, so let's see how this actually works. An investigator would have to follow 4 main paper trails. Each one gives you a totally different piece of this giant puzzle.
So we're talking about digging through court records, filing requests for government files, analyzing police data, and finally, looking at those high-level audit reports. So let's break down what each of these trails can tell us.
First up, the judicial dockets. You can search the national databases, you can look at the High Court's own website for lawsuits about land, but here's the kicker, and it is a huge one. The district council courts, which handle a ton of these disputes, they're often not even on the national grid, so right out of the gate, you know you're flying with a massive blind spot. Okay, clue number 2, we chase the administrative paper trail. This means using right-to-information requests, RTIs, to ask officials directly for the numbers. How many people applied to transfer land? How many were approved? How many were denied? This gets us a lot closer to the official day-to-day process.
Our third trail takes us straight to law enforcement. How many criminal complaints have actually been filed for things like forgery or cheating on land deals? And just as important, what happens to those cases? What's the conviction rate? This gives us a sense of whether the laws on the books are actually being enforced.
And finally, for our last clue, we zoom out. We take that 30,000-foot view. We look at reports from big oversight bodies like the CAG or the National Commission for Scheduled Tribes. Now, sometimes they have compiled data, but what's often more valuable is that they point out the systemic red flags and the gaps they've uncovered.
So you've chased down all these clues, you've followed all 4 trails, and what do you find? Well, here's the craziest part. The most powerful discovery isn't a number you find. It's the silence. It's the empty spaces. The real story is in the data that just isn't there.
And this brings us to what is, maybe, the most critical question in this whole thing. Let's say you do all this work, and the numbers you manage to script together are actually really low. Does that mean the problem's not that big of a deal? That everything's basically fine? Oh no, not even close. You see, low numbers aren't an answer. They're another question. A low number of cases being filed could mean a ton of things. It could mean people are intimidated, that they can't afford a lawyer, or that they have zero faith the system will actually help them. And a low success rate for the cases that do get filed, that could point to huge systemic problems, like bad land surveys that make it impossible to prove ownership.
This is really the heart of it all. The real work isn't just trying to count something that's uncountable. It's about stepping back and interpreting what the presence, or more importantly, the absence of those cases really tells us about the health of the entire system.
And that brings us to this powerful, powerful idea summed up perfectly in this quote: "What goes unmeasured
usually goes unprotected. Just let that sink in for a second. If you aren't even measuring a problem, how can you possibly manage it? If you're not tracking it, how can you ever hope to fix it?
And so, we come full circle. We started this whole journey by asking for a number, and we end by realizing the most stunning discovery, the true finding, is that the number doesn't exist. The real story here is the systemic failure to measure, to track, and to consolidate this incredibly vital information.
And that leaves us with one final, pretty heavy question to think about. It's really the ultimate test for any system that's supposed to offer protection. If the very institutions that are supposed to be the protectors can't even tell you how often they're succeeding, if they can't measure their own performance, then how effective can that protection really be?